Marcus Thorne looked at the empty chair at the head of the boardroom table and smiled a predator's smile. He thought this meeting was a formality, a final execution. The enigmatic and troublesome architect known only as Ethelred, the principal of the firm he'd been forced to hire for his legacy project, was about to be fired in the most public way possible. Marcus was confident. What he didn't know was that the man who was about to walk through that door held not just the future of the project in his hands, but the strings to Marcus's entire empire. Within 1 hour, the life Marcus had built on arrogance and dismissal would be dismantled, piece by painful piece, by the one man he had never even bothered to see. We all love a story where the overlooked finally get their moment, don't we? Where the arrogant are taught a lesson they'll never forget. If you agree, I'd love it if you'd hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens next. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from today? It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. Now, let's get back to how it all began, on a night that felt like the beginning of the end, but was actually the start of a quiet, devastating war. It started, as these things so often do, at a dinner party. The air in Marcus Thorne's penthouse was thick with the scent of money, a blend of expensive perfume, catered hors d'oeuvres, and the faint, metallic tang of ambition. Glass walls offered a god's-eye view of the city, its lights a glittering carpet rolled out for the master of this universe. Liam stood by one of these windows, a ghost at the feast, watching the reflection of the room superimposed over the skyline. In the reflection, he saw his wife, Chloe, laughing at something Marcus had said. It was a laugh he hadn't heard from her in a long time, bright, effortless, and aimed at another man. Chloe had insisted they come. "It's important for my career, Liam," she'd said, her voice tight with an unspoken plea. "Marcus is my boss. These are his partners, his investors. I need to be seen. We need to make a good impression." Liam understood the logic, but the reality was a slow, grinding humiliation. He was an architect, a creator of spaces, yet in this space, he was invisible. He wore a well-tailored but unassuming suit, a stark contrast to the bespoke Italian fabrics and jewel-toned dresses that populated the room. He was introduced, briefly, as Chloe's husband, a title that seemed to diminish him with each utterance. No one asked what he did. It was assumed from his quiet demeanor and his wife's anxious hovering that it was nothing of consequence. He felt a familiar pressure behind his eyes, the dull ache of being systematically erased. He reached into his jacket pocket, his fingers finding the cool, smooth barrel of a fountain pen. It was a simple, elegant object, a gift from his mentor years ago. Holding it was a grounding ritual, a silent conversation with the man he actually was, not the shadow they saw. "Liam, there you are!" Chloe appeared at his side, her smile strained. She held 2 glasses of champagne. "I was looking for you." "I was just admiring the view," he said, his voice even. "You can see the foundation work for the new conservatory from here." Chloe glanced out the window, her eyes unfocused. "Oh, right." Her attention was already back on the room, scanning, calculating. "Listen, Marcus is about to say a few words. We should be closer." She led him toward the center of the living area, a space dominated by a low-slung white sofa and a sculpture that looked like a tangle of chrome nerves. Marcus stood before the massive fireplace, a glass of whiskey in his hand, commanding attention without even raising his voice. He was handsome in a sharp, predatory way, his charisma a weapon he wielded with casual precision. "Thank you all for coming," Marcus began, his voice a smooth baritone that oozed confidence. "It's a big night, not just for Thorne Development, but for this city." He gestured vaguely toward the window. "Out there, we are not just building towers, we are building a legacy. The Phoenix Tower will redefine our skyline, a testament to what vision and, let's be honest, a whole lot of capital can achieve." A ripple of appreciative laughter went through the crowd. Liam remained still, his expression unreadable. He knew more about the Phoenix Tower than anyone in this room, including Marcus. He knew the strains in the budget, the compromises on material quality Marcus was already pushing for, the structural challenges of the chosen site. He knew these things because his firm, the one Marcus was about to unknowingly mock, was the one that had designed it. Of course, Marcus continued, a smirk playing on his lips. A vision is only as good as the people who execute it. Our financiers are the best in the world. He nodded to a stern-looking man in a pinstripe suit. Our construction partners are unparalleled, a nod to another. And our architects, he paused, letting the silence hang in the air. Well, let's just say they are meticulous. The word was delivered with the faintest sneer, as if meticulous were a euphemism for slow or difficult. Liam felt Chloe tense beside him. She knew on some level that this was a jab at her husband's profession, a general dismissal of the creative for the sake of the commercial. They're an interesting bunch, these architects, Marcus went on, warming to his theme. He was performing now, playing to his audience of bankers and lawyers. They live in a world of lines and angles, completely detached from the realities of budget and schedule. They talk about aesthetic integrity while my team is trying to figure out how to pay for the imported Italian marble they insist is essential to the design's soul. More laughter, this time louder. Marcus caught Chloe's eye and winked. She gave a small, hesitant smile in return. Liam watched the exchange, a cold knot tightening in his stomach. It wasn't just that Marcus was mocking his profession. It was that Chloe was allowing it, even validating it with her smile. She was choosing her side, and it wasn't his. A woman with a severe haircut and a diamond necklace turned to Chloe. "Your husband is in a similar field, isn't he?" she asked, her tone dripping with condescension. Before Liam could answer, Chloe jumped in. "Oh, Liam's a draftsman," she said quickly, the word draftsman delivered with a subtle downplay, as if it were a hobby, like building ships in a bottle. "He helps out at one of the big commercial firms. Very technical stuff, not quite as conceptual as the Phoenix Tower." The woman's eyes glazed over with disinterest. She gave Liam a brief, dismissive nod and turned away. A draftsman. The word hung in the air between Liam and Chloe, an ugly little monument to her shame. He wasn't a draftsman. He was the owner and principal designer of Athelred Designs, a firm so exclusive it was known only by its work and its enigmatic name. His technical stuff had won nearly every major architectural award in the last decade. His clients were billionaires and governments who sought him out for his uncompromising vision. He didn't help out, he presided. He looked at his wife. He saw the flicker of guilt in her eyes, quickly suppressed. She wouldn't meet his gaze. She was looking at Marcus again, seeking his approval, her allegiance clear. In that moment, watching her bask in the reflected glow of a man who openly despised everything Liam stood for, he understood that the foundations of his own life were far more compromised than any skyscrapers. The problem wasn't just Marcus. The problem was the woman standing beside him, who was so ashamed of the man he appeared to be that she couldn't see the man he truly was. And that was a structural flaw he wasn't sure he could fix. He squeezed the pen in his pocket, the smooth metal a cold, hard promise to himself. This would not stand. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of polite nods and empty conversations. Liam became a master of the quiet retreat, finding solace near the bookshelves or a less populated corner of the terrace. He watched Chloe move through the party with a practiced ease he hadn't seen in her for years. She was animated, charming, her laughter echoing in the high-ceilinged room. She was performing the role of the ambitious protégé's wife, but she had edited him out of the script, recasting him as a background character with no lines. He was approached only once more with any genuine curiosity. It was by the stern-faced financier Marcus had pointed out earlier, a man named Gerald Finch. Finch had a reputation for being ruthless but fair, a numbers man with an uncanny instinct for a project's viability. "You're quiet," Finch observed, appearing beside Liam at the bar. He wasn't asking a question, he was stating a fact. "I'm listening," Liam replied simply. "And what do you hear?" "I hear a lot of confidence," Liam said, choosing his words carefully. "I hear talk of legacy, of vision, but I don't hear anyone talking about the cost of steel, the new zoning variances, or the geotechnical survey of the site." Finch's eyebrows rose a fraction of an inch. It was the most expression Liam had seen from him all night. "You're not in finance." Another statement. "No," Liam confirmed. "I'm in the business of making sure things don't fall down." Finch studied him for a long moment, his gaze sharp and analytical. It was the first time all night anyone had looked at him as if he might be more than Chloe's unassuming husband. "Marcus is a brilliant salesman," Finch said, his voice low. "He can sell sand in the desert, but he thinks gravity is a line item he can negotiate. The Phoenix Tower is his vanity play. It will either make him a legend or bankrupt him." "There's a thin line between a monument and a tombstone," Liam murmured, almost to himself. A flicker of something, respect perhaps, passed through Finch's eyes. "Indeed," he said. He gave a curt nod. "Chloe's husband, is it?" "Liam," he supplied. "Gerald Finch. If you ever find yourself in need of a conversation that involves actual numbers, look me up." With that, the financier moved away, leaving Liam with a strange and unsettling feeling of having been seen by the one person he hadn't expected. Later, as the party began to thin, Marcus cornered them near the elevator. He slung a familiar arm around Chloe's shoulders. "Your husband is a quiet one, isn't he said to her, as if Liam weren't there. "He's just taking it all in," Chloe said, her voice bright and false. "It's a lot to process, not his usual scene." "I'll say," Marcus chuckled. He finally turned his attention to Liam, his eyes scanning Liam's simple suit with open disdain. "So what is it you do again? Chloe said something about drawing lines for a living." The insult was wrapped in a veneer of casual inquiry, making it all the more potent. "I'm an architect," Liam said, his voice calm and level. He refused to be baited. He would not let this man see a single crack in his composure. "An architect? Right," Marcus said, snapping his fingers. "Well, if you ever get tired of designing suburban strip malls or whatever it is you people do, maybe I can throw you a bone. My dog needs a new house. Something with good bones, you know." He laughed, a loud, braying sound that echoed in the marble foyer. His hand squeezed Chloe's shoulder, pulling her into the joke. Chloe's laugh was a beat late, a hollow echo of Marcus's. It was the sound of capitulation. Liam felt something inside him go cold and still. It was the quiet, precise click of a lock falling into place. He met Marcus's mocking gaze, and for the first time that night, he allowed a fraction of what he was feeling to show in his eyes. Not anger, but a profound, chilling pity. It was the look a geologist might give a mountain just before a landslide. Marcus, utterly blind to the nuance, mistook it for weakness. He clapped Liam on the shoulder, a gesture of dominance disguised as camaraderie. "Good to have you, Liam. Don't be a stranger. Chloe needs someone to drive her home after all the hard work she's doing for me." He winked, then turned and walked away, leaving the insult to hang in the air between them. In the elevator, the silence was a physical presence. The polished steel walls reflected their strained, exhausted faces. Chloe stared at the descending numbers, refusing to look at him. "Well," she said finally, her voice brittle, "that went well, I think." Liam didn't answer. He was still feeling the phantom pressure of Marcus's hand on his shoulder, the casual, proprietary way he had touched his wife, the way he had dismissed his life's work as a joke. "My dog needs a new house." The words replayed in his mind, not as an insult, but as a piece of data. It was a measure of Marcus's arrogance, a baseline from which Liam would calculate his response. The evening hadn't been a humiliation. It had been a reconnaissance mission. And now he had all the intelligence he needed. The car ride home was a symphony of unspoken words. The smooth hum of the engine, the rhythmic sweep of the windshield wipers against a light drizzle, the distant city sounds, all served to amplify the cavernous silence inside the car. Chloe sat rigid in the passenger seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her gaze fixed on the slick, wet streets ahead. Liam drove with a steady, unnerving calm, his hands resting lightly on the wheel. Finally, as they turned onto their quiet, tree-lined street, Chloe spoke. "You're angry," she stated, her voice barely a whisper. "No," Liam said, and it was the truth. Anger was a hot, messy emotion. What he felt was cold, clear, and sharp as a shard of glass. "I'm disappointed." "Liam, you have to understand," she began, the familiar refrain already forming on her lips. "That world, it's different. It's all about perception, about playing the game. He's just like that. He's like that with everyone. It doesn't mean anything. He called my life's work a joke, Chloe. He offered to let me design a doghouse, and you laughed." "What was I supposed to do?" she shot back, her voice rising. "Make a scene? Defend your honor and get myself fired in the process? That party was full of the most powerful people in this city. My career was in that room." "Our life was in that room too," Liam said quietly, pulling the car into their driveway. He cut the engine and the silence rushed back in, heavier than before. "And you chose your career." "That's not fair," she cried, turning to him, her face pale in the dim glow of the dashboard lights. "It's not a choice. It's survival. You don't get it because you're not in it. You have your stable job, your quiet life. You're content. I'm not. I want more. Is that so wrong?" "You have no idea what I have," he thought, the words a silent thunder in his mind. "You have no idea what I'm building, what I'm creating. You're so dazzled by the tinsel that you can't see the gold right in front of you." But he said none of this. The time for words of explanation had passed. Now was the time for action. "He's your boss, Chloe, I understand that. But there's a line between professional deference and personal debasement. You didn't just cross it tonight, you erased it." He got out of the car, the cool night air a welcome relief. Inside the house they moved like strangers, the familiar space of their home suddenly feeling alien and vast. Chloe went straight upstairs, her retreat a clear signal that the conversation was over. Liam remained downstairs in the living room. On a large oak table, unrolled and held down by glass paperweights, were the preliminary schematics for the Phoenix Tower. His schematics. He ran a hand over the fine, heavy paper. He had poured months of his life into this design. It was audacious, elegant, a spiraling structure of glass and steel that was meant to evoke a bird taking flight. It was the most ambitious project his firm had ever undertaken. He'd taken it on under the Ethelred pseudonym precisely to avoid the cult of personality that had begun to follow him, to let the work speak for itself. He had wanted the building to be the star, not the architect. Now that anonymity had become a liability, a shield for Marcus Thorne to hide behind while he mocked the very man who was creating his legacy. Marcus had complained about Ethelred designs from the beginning. He found them rigid, expensive, and frustratingly immune to his charm and his threats. He had tried for weeks to get a face-to-face meeting with the firm's mysterious principal, but Liam had always refused, preferring to communicate through his project managers. He had wanted to maintain a pure, professional distance. Tonight had changed that. The professional had become deeply personal. Marcus hadn't just insulted an anonymous architect. He had insulted Liam, the man. He had belittled him in front of his wife, and his wife had let him. Liam picked up his fountain pen, the one he had held in his pocket all night. He uncapped it and let the nib hover over a blank space on the blueprint. With a few swift, certain strokes, he began to sketch. It wasn't a building. It was a network, a web of connections. He drew a box and labeled it Thorn Development. From it, he drew lines to other boxes: Finch Capital, City Zoning Board, subcontractors, media. Then he drew a new box far off to the side and labeled it Ethelred. Slowly, methodically, he began to draw new lines, faint at first, then firmer. Lines of influence, of debt, of information. Lines that connected Ethelred not to Thorn Development, but to the entities that kept it afloat. He was no longer thinking like an architect designing a building. He was thinking like a strategist designing a siege. Marcus Thorn wanted a legacy. Liam would give him one, but it would not be the one he expected. Marcus saw him as a draftsman, a man who drew lines for a living. He was about to find out just how powerful those lines could be. He was about to learn that the man he thought was building his monument was in fact digging his grave. And the first shovelful of dirt had been tossed tonight, in a penthouse full of glittering people, with a joke about a doghouse. A month later, the company gala was held at the city's most prestigious museum. The invitation had described it as a celebration of Thorn Development's Year of Vision. For Liam, it felt like a summons to a second round of ritualized humiliation. Chloe had been insistent, her arguments a familiar mix of career necessity and veiled threats. Marcus expects us both to be there. It would look strange if you didn't come. So he came. He wore the same dark suit, a quiet statement of consistency in a world of fleeting fashion. This time, however, something in his demeanor had shifted. His calm was no longer just patient, it was predatory. He moved through the cavernous marble halls of the museum with a sense of purpose, his eyes taking in every detail not as a guest, but as a surveyor. He was mapping the terrain of his battlefield. The event was even more opulent than the dinner party. A string quartet played softly in one corner, their music swallowed by the acoustics of the grand atrium. Waiters circulated with trays of oysters and champagne. The elite of the city were all there, their conversations a low hum of deals and gossip. Dominating the center of the room was a massive, exquisitely detailed model of the Phoenix Tower, illuminated from within. It was a monument to Marcus's ego, and a replica of Liam's own design. He stood before the model, looking at the elegant, soaring lines he had created. He could see the flaws in the model, the small compromises in its construction that hinted at the larger ones Marcus was trying to force on the real project. Marcus was arguing for cheaper cladding, a reduction in the number of high-speed elevators, a simplification of the complex sky garden structure. Every request was a small betrayal of the design's integrity, a chipping away at its soul for the sake of the bottom line. So far, Ethelred Designs had held firm, a source of constant, simmering frustration for the developer. Impressive, isn't it? Liam didn't need to turn to know it was Marcus. The voice was like velvet wrapped around a blade. "It's a good model," Liam said, his gaze still fixed on the miniature tower. "A good model?" Marcus scoffed, stepping beside him. He was resplendent in a tuxedo, a stark white pocket square drawing attention to his chest. "It's a masterpiece." "My masterpiece." "A building isn't a masterpiece until it's built, Marcus," Liam said calmly. "Right now, it's an idea. A very expensive idea." Marcus's smile tightened. He wasn't used to being contradicted, however gently. "Always the practical man, eh, Liam? That's why you draw the lines, and I build the empires." He gestured around the room. "This is what it's all about. Power, influence, leaving a mark. You wouldn't understand." Before Liam could formulate a response, Chloe arrived, looking stunning in a sapphire blue dress, but with a familiar anxiety in her eyes. "There you are. Marcus, the photographer from the city magazine, wants a picture of you with the model." "Of course they do," Marcus said, preening. He draped an arm around Chloe. "Come on, you're my star project manager. You should be in it." He then looked at Liam, a wicked glint in his eye. He was about to create a public spectacle. And we should get Liam in the shot too. The whole happy family. He pulled Liam closer, positioning him on the other side of the model. The three of them stood there, Marcus beaming like a king, Chloe, her smile a fragile mask, and Liam, his expression a perfect, placid blank. The photographer raised his camera. "So, what should the caption be?" Marcus said loudly, for the benefit of those standing nearby. "Let's see, the visionary, the protege, and the draftsman." A wave of sycophantic laughter rippled through the onlookers. It was a direct echo of the dinner party, but amplified, made public. The flashbulb went off, capturing the moment in a searing burst of light. Marcus triumphant, Chloe mortified but silent, and Liam standing beside a model of his own creation, being publicly branded as an insignificant footnote. He felt Chloe flinch beside him, but she said nothing. She didn't pull away from Marcus. She didn't look at Liam. She just stood there, frozen, a beautiful statue in a tableau of her husband's degradation. The moment the photographer lowered his camera, Liam stepped back, extricating himself from the group. "Excuse me," he said, his voice devoid of any emotion. He turned and walked away, not in a rush, but with a deliberate, unhurried pace that was more damning than any angry outburst. He could feel their eyes on his back. He found a quiet alcove behind a Grecian statue and leaned against the cool marble. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. He reached into his pocket for his pen, his fingers closing around the familiar shape. And the draftsman. The words were a fresh brand on his psyche. This was the narrative they had chosen for him, the narrative Chloe had co-signed with her silence. He was no longer just disappointed in her. He was beginning to see her as part of the structure that had to be dismantled. She was a compromise beam, a load-bearing wall that had been weakened by the rod of ambition and shame. A building couldn't stand with such a fundamental weakness. Neither could a marriage. He saw Gerald Finch across the room watching him. The financier's expression was, as always, unreadable, but he gave a short, almost imperceptible nod, as if in acknowledgement of the public slight. It was a small gesture, but it registered. Finch saw. Finch understood power, and he understood the abuse of it. Liam's mind was already working, the gears turning with cold, silent precision. He had spent the last month doing more than just designing. He had been learning. He had leveraged the immense, liquid capital his firm generated, wealth Chloe had no idea existed, and had begun a series of quiet, strategic financial maneuvers. He had started by having a third-party acquisitions company, one so obscure it couldn't be traced back to him, purchase small, insignificant-seeming parcels of Marcus Thorne's corporate debt from secondary lenders. It was a pittance for now, a test. Tonight's public display was not an insult, it was a catalyst. It was the final piece of justification he needed to move from a defensive posture to an offensive one. Marcus had made the mistake of thinking the battle was for status and respect. Liam knew the real war was for control. And it was a war Marcus had no idea he was even fighting. As Liam left the alcove and began to walk towards the exit, he saw Chloe hurrying towards him, her face a mess of panic and guilt. "Liam, wait. I'm so sorry," she whispered, grabbing his arm. He'd been drinking." He didn't mean it. Liam looked down at her hand on his arm, then back up at her face. "Yes, he did," he said, his voice soft but final. "And so did you." He gently removed her hand and continued walking, leaving her standing alone in the middle of the crowded room. He didn't look back. The draftsman was leaving the party. It was time to go back to the drawing board. The lie when it came was simple, almost elegant in its transparency. "I have to work late tonight," Chloe said, her voice casual over the phone. "We're prepping for a big presentation to the board. Marcus needs all hands on deck." It was a Thursday, 2 weeks after the gala. The chasm between them had widened into a silent, unbridgeable canyon. They moved through their home with the careful, distant politeness of roommates who barely knew each other. Liam had stopped asking about her day. She had stopped pretending to be interested in his. The air was thick with things unsaid, a quiet, suffocating pressure. "Okay," Liam replied, his own voice equally calm. "Don't work too hard. I'll leave some dinner for you in the fridge." "Thanks, I'll probably be really late. Don't wait up." "I won't." He hung up the phone and stood in the quiet of his home office. The blueprints for a private museum in Kyoto spread across his desk. He looked at the phone, then at the clock. It was just past 6 o'clock. The lie was a clumsy, poorly constructed thing. Thorne Development's board meeting wasn't for another 3 weeks. There was no presentation to prep for. He knew this because his firm was the one scheduled to present. For a moment, a wave of raw, human pain washed over him, a feeling so intense it almost buckled his knees. This was the woman he had married, the woman he had built a life with, a future, and she was lying to him so easily, so carelessly. He had spent years nurturing her dreams, supporting her ambition, celebrating her successes, all while keeping his own monumental achievements quiet, not out of shame, but out of a desire for a normal life. A life where he was just Liam, her husband, not Ethelred, the architectural demigod. He had wanted their relationship to be the one place he wasn't defined by his work. And now that very anonymity was the tool she was using to betray him. The pain receded, replaced by the familiar, cold clarity that had become his constant companion. He had to know. He could no longer operate on assumptions and inferences. He needed to see the truth for himself, no matter how ugly. He changed out of his work clothes into an unremarkable pair of jeans and a dark jacket. He drove not his comfortable sedan, but an older, anonymous car he kept at a small garage for site visits in rough neighborhoods. A car no one would associate with him. He drove towards the city, his movements precise and unhurried. This was not a frantic, jealous pursuit. It was an intelligence-gathering operation. He didn't go to the Thorne Development building. He knew she wouldn't be there. His first stop was a small, high-end bistro in a fashionable district, a place known for its discretion and its powerful clientele. It was a long shot, but it was the kind of place Marcus would choose. He parked across the street, in the shadows of an old oak tree, and waited. The minutes ticked by, stretching into an hour. The streetlights cast long, distorted shadows. He watched couples come and go, their laughter and conversation lost to the sealed environment of his car. He felt a profound sense of detachment, as if he were watching a film of someone else's life. Perhaps he was. The life he thought he had was proving to be a fiction. And then he saw them. Marcus's ostentatious sports car, a gleaming silver beast, pulled up to the valet. Marcus got out, impeccably dressed as always, and handed the keys to the attendant. He then walked around to the passenger side and opened the door. Chloe emerged, wearing a black dress Liam had never seen before. It was elegant, sophisticated, and far more expensive than anything she would normally wear. Marcus placed a hand on the small of her back, a gesture of casual intimacy that was both proprietary and public. He guided her towards the restaurant's entrance. They were laughing, their heads close together. They looked for all the world like a couple. Liam's breath caught in his chest. He watched them disappear inside, the heavy oak door closing behind them. For a long, silent moment, he just sat there, the engine off, the world outside muted and distant. There it was, the truth, inarguable and devastating. "He's just my boss," she had said. "He's just a coworker," she had implied with every excuse. This was not a boss and his employee working late. This was something else entirely. He could have driven away then. He had seen enough. But he didn't. He needed to see the whole picture. He had to understand the full extent of the deception. He got out of the car and walked across the street. The restaurant was exclusive, but he had designed the building next to it, and he knew there was a small, secluded bar on the second floor of the adjacent hotel that had a clear view into the bistro's main dining room. He took the elevator up, his face a stony mask. The bar was dimly lit and mostly empty. He took a seat in a dark corner, a booth that offered a perfect, unobstructed sightline to their table. He ordered a glass of water and sat back, a silent observer in the rafters of his own personal tragedy. He watched them for nearly 2 hours. He watched Marcus order for them both without consulting her. He watched Chloe's rapt attention, the way she leaned in, her eyes never leaving his face. He watched Marcus talk, his hands gesturing, painting pictures in the air, pictures of power, of success, of the world he commanded. And he watched Chloe drink it all in, captivated. The most damning moment came near the end of their meal. Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out a slim, elegant envelope. It was from a high-end jeweler. Liam recognized the logo instantly. He slid it across the table to Chloe. She opened it, and her face lit up with a genuine, unadulterated joy that he hadn't seen directed at him in years. She pulled out a delicate diamond necklace. It glittered under the restaurant lights. Marcus leaned forward, his voice a low murmur that Liam couldn't hear, but the intent was clear. It wasn't a bonus. It wasn't a corporate gift. It was a transaction. It was payment for services rendered, for her loyalty, her admiration, her complicity. Chloe looked up at Marcus, her eyes shining, and she mouthed the words, "Thank you." Liam felt the last of his foundations crumble. The man who designed skyscrapers, who understood the immense, immutable forces of tension and compression, had failed to see the stress fractures in his own life. The lies weren't the problem. The dinner wasn't the problem. Even an affair, in some ways, would have been simpler. This was worse. This was a transfer of allegiance. She hadn't just chosen another man, she had chosen another life, a value system that was the antithesis of everything he believed in. She had been purchased. He stood up, placed a few bills on the table for the water he hadn't touched, and walked out. He didn't look back. As he drove home through the empty city streets, the cold clarity returned, sharper and more absolute than ever before. The war was no longer just with Marcus Thorne. The map of the battlefield had been redrawn. He now knew the location of every enemy, every collaborator, every compromised asset. The draftsman had finished his survey. It was time to draw the final, ruinous lines. He was waiting in the living room when she came home, just after midnight. The house was dark except for a single lamp, casting long shadows that made the familiar room feel like a stage. He sat in an armchair, perfectly still, the silence of the house his only companion. He had showered, changed, and put away every trace of his journey into the city. He had made himself a cup of tea. He was the picture of a man who had spent a quiet evening at home. The sound of her key in the lock was unnaturally loud. The door opened and closed softly. He heard the click of her heels on the hardwood floor of the foyer, then a pause. She must have sensed his presence in the darkness. "Liam," she called out, her voice tentative, "you're still up." He switched on the lamp beside him, illuminating his small corner of the room. "I was reading," he said. His voice was calm, almost gentle. He held a book in his lap, his finger marking his place. She walked into the living room, her guard immediately up. She was still wearing the black dress, but she had taken off the necklace. It was likely tucked away in her purse, a glittering secret. "Oh, I thought you'd be asleep." "The project I'm on is at a critical phase. My mind was too active to sleep." It was not a lie. She came further into the room, avoiding his eyes, her movements jerky and unnatural. "Right, well, it was a long night. The presentation is going to be killer, but the prep is brutal." The lie came out again, a little more practiced this time, but still flimsy. "I'm sure," he said. He looked at her, truly looked at her. He saw the faint flush on her cheeks, the slight dishevelment of her hair. He saw the guilt warring with defiance in her eyes. "Did Marcus work you hard?" The question was a quiet bomb. The use of her boss's first name, The subtle implication in the phrase, "work you hard," landed with devastating precision. She froze. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means you look tired," he said, his expression unchanged. "He must be a demanding boss." She visibly relaxed, mistaking his subtlety for ignorance. "He is," she said, seizing the lifeline. "He expects the best from everyone. That's why he's so successful." She was defending him, even now. "Yes," Liam said, a strange, sad smile touching his lips. "His success is very important to you." This time the shot hit home. She couldn't ignore the meaning behind his words. "What are you trying to say, Liam? If you have something to say, just say it." He closed his book, setting it aside with deliberate care. He looked at her, and the gentleness in his eyes was replaced by a piercing, analytical focus. "You told me you were working late at the office with your team." We were," she stammered, her composure finally cracking. "We went out for a bite to eat afterwards, to decompress. It was a team dinner." "A team dinner," he repeated, the words tasting like ash. "At La Belle Époque? The whole team?" Her face went white. He had named the restaurant. The foundation of her lie disintegrated in an instant. She stared at him, her mouth slightly agape, her mind racing to build a new fiction, a new wall to hide behind. How did you know that?" she whispered. "That's not the important question, is it, Chloe?" he said, his voice dropping, becoming softer, yet more powerful. "The important question is, why did you lie?" "It wasn't a lie. It was a simplification. I knew you would overreact, that you would get jealous and possessive because you hate Marcus. I didn't want to fight. It was just dinner, Liam. He's just a coworker. My boss. That's all." There it was, the pathetic, defining lie of their recent life. He's just a coworker. Liam stood up. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't move towards her. He just stood there, a figure of immense, sorrowful stillness. "Stop," he said. The single word carried so much weight it seemed to suck the air from the room. "Just stop lying." He walked over to the large oak table where his own work, the real work, was laid out. He picked up his fountain pen. He held it up. "This pen was a gift from a man named Jean-Pierre Moreau," he said, his voice a low murmur. "You've never heard of him. He's arguably the greatest living architect of our time. He gave it to me when I won the Pritzker Prize 5 years ago. I didn't attend the ceremony. I sent a proxy. I didn't want the fame. I wanted the work. I wanted a life with you that was separate from that." He looked from the pen to her, and she stared back, utterly bewildered, having no idea what he was talking about. "You talk about Marcus's success. You're mesmerized by his cheap, flashy world. You think his penthouse and his sports car are the measure of a man. You stand there and you let him call me a draftsman. You laugh. You think my life is small and quiet and safe." He took a step towards her. "My firm, the one you've never bothered to ask about in any real detail, currently has a valuation of over $900 million. I don't have a boss, Chloe. I have a board. I don't help out on projects. I am the final word on the design of civic centers, national museums, and corporate headquarters across 4 continents. The Phoenix Tower, the project you are so desperate to be a part of, the one you are sacrificing your integrity for? Marcus Thorne didn't hire Athelred Designs. He begged for us. And Athelred is not a company, it's me." He let the words hang in the air, a series of detonations that she could not comprehend. Her face was a canvas of shock, disbelief, and dawning, catastrophic horror. "But that's not the point," he continued, his voice softening again into that terrible, pitying tone. "The money, the success, it's all just context. The point is that you looked at the man you married, the man who loved you, and you saw nothing. You were so blinded by the light of someone else's fire that you couldn't see the sun standing right next to you. You didn't betray me for a man, Chloe. You betrayed me for a cheap imitation of a life you thought you wanted. He turned and walked back to his chair. The presentation to the board is in 3 weeks, he said, his back to her. I suggest you prepare. It's going to be a difficult day for Thorn Development. He sat down, picked up his book, and opened it to his marked page. The message was clear. The conversation was over. Her world had just been shattered, and he was already moving on. She stood frozen in the middle of the room for what felt like an eternity, the silence roaring in her ears. Then, a small, broken sound escaped her lips, and she turned and fled up the stairs. Liam didn't look up from his book. He didn't have to. He had already calculated the trajectory of the fall. The weeks that followed were a study in controlled demolition. On the surface, life in the house continued its strained, silent routine. Chloe was a ghost, her face pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and confusion. She tried to talk to him twice. The first time she approached him with a torrent of questions, apologies, and accusations. Why didn't you tell me? How could you let me? How could you not say anything? He had simply looked up from his work and said, would it have mattered? And the question had silenced her. The second time she had simply stood in the doorway of his office, tears streaming down her face, and whispered, I'm sorry. He had nodded, a curt, final acknowledgement, and turned back to his screen. There was nothing left to say. The damage was too deep, the structural integrity of their marriage fatally compromised. While his home life was a quiet ruin, his professional life surged with focused, relentless energy. The information he had revealed to Chloe was only the tip of the iceberg. His true power lay not just in his wealth, but in his reputation and the network it had built. The name Aethelred opened doors that Marcus Thorne couldn't even find. Liam made a single phone call. It was to Gerald Finch. They met not in an office, but on a park bench overlooking the river, 2 men in simple coats watching the water flow by. I was at the gala, Finch said without preamble. What Marcus did was distasteful. It was informative, Liam replied. He then laid out his plan, not with anger or a desire for revenge, but with the cold, dispassionate logic of an engineer explaining a stress test. He explained who he was. He detailed the quiet acquisition of Thorn Development's debt, which now amounted to a significant, though not yet controlling, portion. He then explained the next phase. Marcus is over-leveraged, Liam stated. The Phoenix Tower is his Hail Mary. He's been trying to cut costs on my design, and my team has been blocking him. He's getting desperate. He's planning to fire my firm at the next board meeting and replace us with a cheaper, more compliant alternative called Apex Innovate. Finch nodded. I've heard the name. A new player. Aggressive pricing. Apex Innovate, Liam said, a faint, humorless smile on his face, is a shell corporation I established 6 months ago through a proxy in Delaware. Its portfolio is impressive because I designed every building in it. Its financials are impeccable because I funded it. And its leadership team is loyal to me because they are my most trusted senior partners. Finch was silent for a long moment. He looked at Liam, his shrewd eyes reassessing the quiet man beside him. You built a Trojan horse. I built a better option, Liam corrected. One that Marcus, in his arrogance and desperation, will walk right into. When he fires Aethelred, he will passionately advocate for Apex. He'll present it as his discovery, his masterstroke to save the project. And the board, concerned about the budget, will agree with him. And then? Finch asked. And then, Liam said, his gaze fixed on the distant, rising skeleton of the Phoenix Tower. At the moment of his greatest triumph, I will walk into the room, and I will show them who owns the horse. Finch allowed himself a small, dry smile. You're not an architect, Liam. You're a poet. He stood up. Thorn Development has a significant line of credit with my bank. We hold the primary note on his corporate headquarters. His quarterly review is next month. I will be sure to scrutinize his liquidity with renewed interest. Thank you, Gerald, Liam said. Don't thank me, Finch replied. I'm a banker. I follow the strength. You've just demonstrated where it lies. Meanwhile, Marcus Thorne was blissfully unaware, his arrogance a shield against the coming storm. From his perspective, things were finally going his way. The difficult, faceless architects at Aethelred were about to be dealt with. He had found their replacement in Apex Innovate, a firm that seemed to understand the realities of business, a firm that praised his vision instead of questioning it. He celebrated his cleverness with Chloe. He took her to expensive dinners, bought her more gifts. He saw her distraction and her melancholy, not as signs of a collapsing inner world, but as fatigue from her hard work. He was the center of his own universe, and everyone else was just a satellite. You're quiet lately, he said to her one evening as they sat in another overpriced restaurant. Is your husband giving you a hard time? Is he jealous of all the time we're spending together? Chloe, who now knew she was dining with a man who was actively at war with her husband, could only shake her head, a numb, helpless gesture. No, she whispered, he's not. Good, Marcus said, pleased. He knows his place. A man's got to know his place. He raised his glass in a toast. To the board meeting, the day we finally get this project on track. Chloe looked at the man across the table, so confident, so powerful, and so utterly, hopelessly blind. And for the first time she felt a sliver of the same cold, devastating pity that she had once seen in her husband's eyes. She was trapped between two titans, one loud and oblivious, the other silent and apocalyptic. And she knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that the silence was infinitely more dangerous. The day of the meeting was not the day the project would get on track. It was the day the world would come to an end. The morning of the board meeting dawned gray and overcast, the sky a flat, oppressive ceiling of metallic cloud. The weather was a perfect mirror of the atmosphere inside Liam and Chloe's house. A heavy, charged silence had fallen, the kind that precedes a lightning strike. Liam rose at his usual time. He went through his morning routine with a deliberate, almost meditative calm. He showered, he shaved, he dressed. But instead of his usual work attire, he selected the suit he had worn to the gala. The suit in which he had been publicly labeled the draftsman. He put it on, the fabric feeling less like clothing and more like a costume he was about to shed. In his pocket, he placed the fountain pen from Jean-Pierre Moreau. Chloe was already in the kitchen, staring into a cup of coffee she hadn't touched. She was dressed for the office, her face a pale, drawn mask. Her eyes were shadowed, as if she hadn't slept in weeks. When Liam walked in, she looked up, and her breath hitched. You're going in?" she whispered. "I have a presentation to give," he said simply. He poured himself a glass of water, his movements economical and precise. "Liam, please," she begged, her voice cracking. "Don't do this. Whatever you're planning, just don't. It's enough. You've made your point. I know who you are. Please." He turned to face her, his expression not unkind, but impossibly distant. "This was never about making a point to you, Chloe. It stopped being about you that night I saw you with him. This is about a skyscraper that, under Marcus Thorne's leadership, will be a danger to this city. It's about a company built on arrogance and rot. It's about the difference between building something that lasts and building a monument to a fragile ego." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Marcus and men like him believe that people like me, the quiet ones, the creators, the draftsmen, exist to serve their vision. They believe their power gives them the right to diminish others. Today is not about revenge. It is a correction, a restoration of balance." He finished his water and placed the glass in the sink. "You should get to work. You wouldn't want to be late for the big meeting." The finality in his tone was absolute. There was no appeal, no negotiation. He was a force of nature now, a tectonic plate shifting into its final, cataclysmic position. Chloe watched him walk out of the kitchen, a man she had lived with for a decade but had never known. She was an accessory to the life he had built, and now she was about to be an accessory to the life he was going to destroy. Liam's drive to the city was quiet. He didn't listen to music. He listened to the hum of the engine, the sound of the tires on the pavement. He was utterly focused, his mind a quiet, orderly space where every variable had been calculated, every contingency planned for. He arrived at the Thorn Development Tower, a gleaming monument to Marcus's ambition. Liam had always found the building itself to be a perfect metaphor for its owner, flashy on the outside, but with questionable structural choices and a poor use of internal space. He handed the keys of his unassuming sedan to the valet, who looked at him with a hint of confusion, unused to seeing such a modest vehicle pull up to the entrance. He walked into the lobby, the space a cathedral of marble and polished chrome, designed to intimidate. The receptionist, a young woman with a headset and a perpetually bored expression, looked up as he approached. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone implying he was probably lost. "I'm here for the 10 a.m. board meeting," Liam said. "My name is Liam Hestwood." She typed his name into her system. A flicker of surprise crossed her face. "Oh, you're with Aethelred Designs." "I am Aethelred Designs," he corrected gently. Her eyes widened. She had heard the rumors, the whispers about the firm's mysterious, reclusive principal. She had imagined some eccentric old man with a flowing white beard, not this calm, well-dressed man who looked to be in his early 40s. "Of course, sir," she stammered, her professionalism kicking in. "They're on the 50th floor, the executive boardroom. I'll badge you up." He took the visitor's pass and walked towards the elevators. He could feel her eyes on him, her mind trying to reconcile the name on her screen with the man in front of her. The elevator ride to the 50th floor was silent and swift. As he ascended, he watched the city spread out below him. The buildings he knew so intimately, some of which he had designed, receding into a complex geometric pattern. When the doors opened, he stepped out into a hushed, carpeted reception area. A severe-looking executive assistant sat at a large desk. Chloe stood near the window, her back to him, wringing her hands. She turned as the elevator chimed, and her face went ashen when she saw him. "They're all in there," she said, her voice a strained whisper. "Marcus is about to start." "I know," Liam said. He walked past her, not with malice, but with the focused intent of a surgeon heading into the operating theater. He paused outside the grand double doors of the boardroom. He could hear the low murmur of voices from within. He took a single, deep breath. He thought of the dinner party, the jokes about the doghouse. He thought of the gala, the flash of the camera, the word draftsman hanging in the air. He thought of Chloe's face in the restaurant, illuminated by the glow of another man's gift. These were not fuel for anger. They were data points, coordinates on a map that had led him, with unerring accuracy, to this exact spot, at this exact moment. He reached for the handle, his hands steady. The quiet before the storm was over. It was time to make it rain. He pushed the doors open and walked in. The boardroom fell silent. 20 pairs of eyes turned towards him. The room was long and imposing, dominated by a massive mahogany table that shone under the recessed lighting. At the far end, Marcus Thorne stood, a remote in his hand, a triumphant smirk on his face. A large screen behind him displayed the Thorne Development logo. Seated along the table were the members of the board, a collection of stern, powerful-looking men and women, including Gerald Finch, whose face remained a perfect, stony neutral. And there, in a chair slightly behind Marcus, was Chloe, looking at him with an expression of pure dread. Marcus's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion and annoyance. "Liam? What the hell are you doing here? The help's entrance is in the back." He thought Liam was a waiter or a technician. "I believe I was invited," Liam said, his voice carrying easily in the silent room. He walked calmly towards the empty chair at the head of the table, the one opposite Marcus. It was the chair reserved for the presenter. "Invited?" Marcus scoffed, regaining his composure. "Security! We have an intruder!" "He's not an intruder, Marcus," Gerald Finch said, his voice cutting through the tension like a razor. "He's on the agenda. Please, let the man take his seat." Marcus stared at Finch, then back at Liam, his mind struggling to process this impossibility. The other board members murmured, confused. Liam reached the chair and stood behind it, placing a thin leather portfolio on the table. He looked directly at Marcus, his gaze steady. "You were expecting the principal of Ethelred Designs," Liam said, his voice quiet but resonant. "I'm him." The statement landed in the room with the force of a physical blow. A wave of shock rippled around the table. Board members leaned forward, whispering to each other. Chloe squeezed her eyes shut, as if she could will herself out of existence. But the most profound reaction was Marcus's. His face went through a rapid series of transformations: disbelief, confusion, dawning comprehension, and finally a deep crimson flush of rage and humiliation. The man he had mocked, belittled, and dismissed as a draftsman was the celebrated, enigmatic genius he had been at war with for months. The joke was, and always had been, on him. "You?" Marcus sputtered, a strangled laugh escaping his lips. "You are Ethelred? That's impossible. This is a joke." "A pathetic, desperate trick." "Is it?" Liam asked calmly. He opened his portfolio and slid a document across the polished table towards the lead board member, an older woman named Eleanor Vance. "That is the original incorporation document for the firm, along with the patents for the structural systems used in the Kyoto Museum, the Lisbon Maritime Center, and, of course, the Phoenix Tower. My name is on all of them." Eleanor picked up the document, her eyes scanning it quickly. She looked up at Liam, her expression one of stunned respect. "It's him," she said to the rest of the board. "It's all in order." Marcus looked like he had been punched in the gut. "So what?" he snarled, trying to recover, to regain control of the room. "Fine. You're the architect. Congratulations. You're still fired." He clicked the remote and the screen behind him changed. The Ethelred logo was replaced by that of Apex Innovate. "As I was saying before I was so rudely interrupted, Ethelred's intransigence and refusal to adhere to budget has put this project in jeopardy. But I have found a solution, a brilliant, agile firm called Apex Innovate. They have reviewed the plans and have already identified $10 million in savings without compromising the artistic vision." He said the last words with a sneer directed at Liam. "I am recommending we terminate our contract with Ethelred Designs, effective immediately, and sign with Apex." He looked around the table, expecting nods of agreement. But the board was looking at Liam, waiting. Liam smiled. It was the first time he had smiled in the room, and it was a chilling sight. "An excellent proposal, Marcus. Apex is a fine firm. Their portfolio is impeccable. Their team is first-rate. I should know. I founded it 6 months ago." Another shockwave hit the room, stronger than the first. Marcus's jaw literally dropped. He stared at Liam, his face a mask of utter bewilderment. "You... what?" "Apex Innovate is a wholly owned subsidiary of my personal holding company," Liam explained, his tone patient, as if explaining a simple concept to a child. "I created it as a contingency. I suspected, given your business practices, that you might try to replace my firm with a cheaper alternative. So I created the cheaper alternative, and you walked right into it." He turned his attention from Marcus to the board. "Marcus is correct. Apex can save $10 million on the project, but those savings come from the use of inferior materials, cutting corners on safety protocols, and exploiting non-union labor. All things my primary firm, Ethelred, would never do. The very things Marcus has been trying to force us to do for months. He didn't find a solution, ladies and gentlemen. He found a mirror, and he liked what he saw. The moral mirror. He had forced Marcus to endorse his own worst impulses. Gerald Finch coughed to hide a smile. Eleanor Vance looked at Marcus with undisguised contempt. "But this," Liam said, his voice dropping, "is not why I'm here." He pulled another set of documents from his portfolio. "Firing my firm is no longer your decision to make. Or yours, Marcus." He slid the documents to the center of the table. "Over the last 2 months, a private equity firm has been systematically acquiring Thorn Development's debt, your corporate bonds, your secondary mortgages, your lines of credit. As of 9 a.m. this morning, that firm acquired the final piece it needed from Mr. Finch's bank to become the majority holder of your debt. You are, for all intents and purposes, in default. And that firm has exercised its right to call an immediate vote to restructure the board and replace its CEO." He paused, letting the full weight of his words settle. "That private equity firm is also owned by my holding company. As of 90 minutes ago, I control this company. Your company, Marcus." The room was utterly, deathly silent. Marcus Thorne stood pale and trembling, his remote clattering from his nerveless fingers to the floor. The empire he had built, the legacy he had boasted of, had vanished in the space of 5 minutes. He had been conquered, not by a rival developer or a corporate raider, but by the quiet draftsman he had offered to hire to build a house for his dog. Liam looked at the man he had so thoroughly dismantled. "You were right about one thing, Marcus. A man's got to know his place. Your place is no longer at the head of this table." He then turned his gaze to Chloe, who was staring at him, her face wet with silent tears. "And your place," he said, his voice holding not a trace of anger, but only a profound, bottomless sadness, "was never by his side." The aftermath was not an explosion, but a quiet, efficient implosion. Marcus Thorne didn't shout or rage. He simply sank into his chair, a deflated balloon of a man, his face a gray, slack mask of shock. The carefully constructed edifice of his ego had been demolished, and there was nothing left inside. The board members, practical and ruthless, immediately shifted their allegiance to the new center of power. Eleanor Vance, the lead director, cleared her throat. "Mr. Hestwood," she said, her voice crisp and businesslike, "it appears we have a great deal to discuss. First, a motion to accept the resignation of Mr. Thorne as CEO. "Seconded," Finch said immediately. "All in favor?" A chorus of ayes filled the room. It was swift, brutal, and utterly unanimous. Marcus didn't even seem to register it. He was staring at the polished surface of the table, at the reflection of a ruined man. Liam then addressed the board, his tone shifting from prosecutorial to constructive. "My intention is not to liquidate this company. Thorn Development has good people and valuable assets. It has been crippled by poor leadership, a culture of arrogance, and a reckless disregard for quality. That will change starting today." He laid out his vision. The Phoenix Tower would be built to its original, uncompromised specifications. Costs would be managed not by cutting corners, but by efficiency and the superior logistics his own firm could bring to bear. He spoke of long-term stability over short-term profits, of building a reputation for integrity, not just for scale. He was not just an architect, he was a leader, his vision extending far beyond the lines on a blueprint. The board listened, captivated. They were not just witnessing a corporate takeover, they were witnessing a paradigm shift. Throughout it all, Chloe remained frozen in her chair, a spectator at the public dismantling of her world. She had hitched her wagon to a falling star, and now she was trapped in the wreckage. The man she had admired was a fraud. The man she had dismissed was a king. Her choices, her ambitions, her small betrayals, all of them had been based on a catastrophic misreading of reality. Finally, when the initial motions were passed and the new order was established, Liam turned his attention to her. The rest of the board tactfully looked down at their papers, giving them a semblance of privacy. Chloe, he said, and her name was a quiet, sorrowful note in the charged room. She looked up, her eyes pleading. Liam, I didn't know. I know you didn't, he said. That was the entire problem. You didn't look. You didn't ask. You were so eager to be part of his world that you never bothered to understand mine. He stood up and walked around the table until he was standing before her. He didn't loom over her. He simply stood, forcing her to look up at him. The life you wanted, the one you saw at his parties, the one he promised you with trinkets and lies, it was all a facade. Real strength, real success isn't loud. It isn't arrogant. It's quiet. It's competent. It's the ability to build things that last, whether it's a skyscraper or a relationship. You gave up on ours because you thought it was small. You were wrong. He reached into his pocket and took out his pen. He looked at it for a moment, then placed it gently on the table in front of her. This represents a world of integrity, of quiet excellence, of substance over style. Everything that Marcus is not, everything I tried to build with you. He pushed it slightly towards her. Your position in this company is gone, obviously. Your association with him, he nodded towards the still catatonic Marcus, makes you a liability. But that's just a job. The more important question is what you do now. He looked into her eyes. I'm not offering you forgiveness, Chloe. That's not mine to give. And I'm not offering you a way back. That bridge is gone. I am offering you a choice. You can continue to chase the life that Marcus represented, the empty glamour, the status, the reflections in the window. Or you can try to find your way back to the principles that this pen represents. Not with me, but within yourself. The choice is yours. He turned and walked back to his seat at the head of the table, the new king on his throne. He had given her nothing and everything. He had taken away her career, her lover, her world, but he had given her back a choice about who she wanted to be. A choice she hadn't had or hadn't allowed herself to have in a very long time. Chloe stared at the pen, its simple, elegant form a stark rebuke to the diamond necklace tucked away in her purse. It was the choice between substance and surface, between true worth and perceived value. Slowly, her hand trembling, she reached out and closed her fingers around it. The meeting continued around her, the discussion of finances and logistics and futures she was no longer a part of. But she didn't hear it. She just held the pen, the cool, solid weight of it a grounding anchor in the ruins of her life. The weeks after the meeting were a blur of transition. Liam, taking the helm as interim CEO, moved with breathtaking speed and efficiency. He initiated a full-scale audit of Thorn Development, uncovering years of Marcus's financial mismanagement and corner-cutting. He fired the sycophants and promoted the competent, rewarding talent and integrity over loyalty. He met with the construction teams, the engineers, the city planners, not as a distant executive, but as a fellow builder, speaking their language, earning their respect. The culture of fear and arrogance that had defined the company began to dissipate, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose and pride. Marcus Thorn vanished from public life. His assets were frozen, his reputation shattered. The last Liam heard, he had sold his penthouse and his sports car to cover his personal debts and had moved to a small, rented apartment, a ghost in the city he had once claimed to own. It was a fitting, poetic justice. The man who lived for appearances was forced to live without them. And Chloe? She had left the boardroom that day, the pen clutched in her hand. She went back to their house, packed a single bag, and left. She didn't leave a note. There was nothing left to say. Liam came home that evening to a house that was emptier, but somehow lighter. The oppressive weight of her unhappiness and his disappointment was gone. About a month later, a package arrived for him at his Aethelred office. It was a small, unassuming box. Inside was the fountain pen he had left for her on the boardroom table. Tucked alongside it was a simple, handwritten note. "You were right," it said. I was looking at the wrong things. I don't know if I can ever find my way back, but I know I can't start while holding on to something I didn't earn. This belongs to you. Maybe one day I'll have something of my own that I'm proud of. Goodbye, Liam, and thank you." He read the note, a sense of melancholy peace settling over him. It was not a happy ending, but it was a real one. It was an ending of consequences, of lessons learned in the harshest of ways. He had not sought her ruin, only the truth. Her path now was her own, and for the first time, she was walking it without leaning on him or on a man like Marcus. It was a painful, lonely beginning, but it was a beginning nonetheless. Liam picked up the pen and put it back in his pocket. He turned to the window of his office, which overlooked the rising steel structure of the Phoenix Tower. It was being built correctly now, a true masterpiece of design and engineering, a testament to integrity. He had won the war, not just for a building, but for a principle, that true worth is not in what you project, but in what you build. And he was a builder. He always had been. It's a powerful story, isn't it? It reminds us that dignity isn't something others can give you or take away. It's something you hold within yourself. Liam never lost his dignity, even when he was being humiliated, because he knew his own worth. The people who tried to diminish him only ended up diminishing themselves. I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Was Liam's response justified, or did he go too far? And what do you think will happen to Chloe? Will she find her way? Let me know in the comments below. Your perspective makes this community what it is. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel for more stories of quiet strength and satisfying justice. Thank you for joining me today, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.